Hello, mortals. Meow. Hello, hello. Good morning. Jake. Yes, hello, hello. I guess before I get started, let me go back here. This is a treat for people who are early. Never mind. Well, I guess. Okay, so. Yeah, she's scared. So I decided to retitle my ghost mantis, my praying mantis. I used to call her Francis Cannibal Queen, but I'm renaming her Francis Cannibal Witch, because witches are more solitary than queens, and I figure that makes more sense. So while I'm here, I'm also gonna spray her enclosure, and then for lucky, I'll be able to show Dr. Baby at the end, but not now. All right, so let me transition and get started. You like that transition, huh? Smooth. All right. Time in comics. So that is our subject matter today. Before I start, this happens every week, but I have a very foggy brain. I did a sleep study this weekend where I had to put this device on me and like around me and on my finger and up my nose, and it was very uncomfortable and did not help me sleep better. It's supposed to measure how well I sleep, and I did not sleep well at all. So I'm definitely gonna make some errors in talking, as usual. Anyways, time in comics. Oh, we're on week 5. We're halfway through this term, which is kind of weird, but it happens. Okay, so what is time? I'm gonna read directly off here. It's worth it. So the Wikipedia definition is: time is the indefinite continued progress of existence and events that occur in apparently irreversible succession from the past through the present to the future. And then my favorite personal definition was on the Urban Dictionary. Time is a distance between being born and being buried. Time is the seconds you spend laughing, the hours you spend talking, and the lifetime you spend loving. Time is how long you stare into his eyes and tell him that you love him. Time is how long you sit in your room crying when he hurts you. Time is how long it takes you to find someone who cares. Time is moving on. Time is time what you live off of. Use your time wisely, because once it's gone forever. So I've read this for 3 years in a row, and it's never not funny. This Urban Dictionary definition. It's like a really cheesy romantic thing, but you know what? if that's what time means to the person who wrote this, that's what time means. So yeah, so what is time? Everyone knows what time is. I'm not really going to explain it scientifically because it's one of those things where, just like most of the stuff I've talked about, there's no perfect definition for what it means, and it changes between people. But you understand it essentially what it is, and however you understand it, that's valid. Okay, so when we talk about time, we talk about it being 4D in art, which again doesn't make sense that's not like the physics way of explaining what 4D is. 4D is different dimension, but when in the realm of art, 4D basically means video and animation, which means time. Essentially, if time's included in this artwork, it's 4D. And actually, I teach a class called Art 122 Foundations in Motion 4D, which is a video and animation class, but mostly video. And I include video games too. But yeah, it's not technically right, but we understand. Yeah, sure, that works. Whatever. And it's funny because even though it's 4D, a lot of what we use is 2D, like drawing as animation. That's 2D, and then so we just get the third dimension, I guess. Same thing with video. It's a flat screen. Who knows? So 4D, you just take it for granted. All right, that's time. Okay, also there's this weird medium or group of media called new genres or new media, which is also weird, but that essentially means computer-based technology or stuff that's not considered traditional, that didn't exist like 100 years ago or something like that. Thanks, Amorpher. Yeah, so like this, for example, is from a Twitter bot called This Band Isn't Real, and it takes information from a bunch of different metal album covers or something like that and makes an image out of it. So there's nothing real in this, and it's not a real band or anything. But this would be considered new genres. So it's this weird grouping. So, and for some reason, even though video's old, like 50 years old at this point, it's still considered new genres. I don't know. But yeah, but when I talk about but we're going to talk about 4D in general. All right, so video art there's a huge history that comes with it, but essentially when we talk about video art, it's video art according to like major art institutions that have a lot of money, that's run by rich white people essentially. And this conception of video art was essentially born because of this invention, the Sony Portapak. So instead of video cameras costing like hundreds of thousands of dollars, I think this costs like a couple $1,000s, which is still very expensive, but for consumers it was obviously a lot more affordable, because video was confined to studios who had the kind of money to purchase that technology. So once video recording devices became more affordable and more transportable, then anyone could use it. And of course, artists being artists, they used it for their own purposes that were different. And it was important because it really broke down conceptions of what video has to be about or how long a video can be. So even though a lot of video art would be considered pretentious, which is, we're going to have a whole lecture on art is pretentious. Even though a lot of the art is considered pretentious, it's very important for what it did to perception of what video can be. It doesn't have to be half-hour weather program. It could be or 8 hours of zooming into the Empire State Building, which is a video by Andy Warhol that I'll never watch. So, this one's unavailable. Oh, it was working yesterday. Oh well. So, I'm not going to talk about it then. But so in the these are examples of early video art. I'm not going to show them all. But yeah, this is so William Wegman. Most of you know him through, if you know him, if you're old enough, know him through dressing these dogs up in different human costumes and stuff like that. But most of you probably know these dogs from Sesame Street, apparently. I've never seen that. But he was a very influential video artist where he played with, again, what you can do with video without the constraints of a network studio budget, right? And so this one, I think I don't know if it said, but I think it's called Ball, where he's like showing the ball to his puppies. So he started, he did a lot of painting back then too, but yeah, he started off with getting known through his video work, but yeah, now he's known through dressing dogs up. Okay. You can watch the rest by yourself. There's also a lot of different, this is a more contemporary, this was 2007, but it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. I'm just gonna play a couple minutes, or probably less than a minute of it. I should zoom forward a little bit. So anyways, this was made in 2007, where, I mean, I guess reality TV is still a thing, but yeah, this is a comment on reality TV. It's super ridiculous. To me, it's slow because I've seen this probably 20 times. This one segment out of this 100 or an hour and 47-minute video. But yeah, I recommend watching, going through the slide, and there's a section that I cut out. But yeah, it's super hyper. It's super ridiculous. And it took me 5 to 7 watches to understand what's going on. So yeah, this video is addressing pop culture by the medium of video and what you can do with it, how hyper and silly can get to comment on how hyper and silly pop culture is, etc., etc. So I'm not going to play this, but this is Rubber Johnny, made in 2005, collaboration between Chris Cunningham and Aphx Twin, and it's pretty disturbing stuff. It's safe for work technically, but it's very creepy. It might make your skin crawl. So Aphx Twin's a musician, and this is, and the music for this is one of his songs that's sort of remixed for this. And so can music videos that are weird and arty be video art? I don't know. So I think music videos are interesting because a lot of them do push boundaries of what you see broadcast on TV. There's some weird stuff that happens in some of these music videos that would be considered video art, but it's also a commercial product. And where's the line between that? Again, it depends on your personal definition, what you care about. I would say, yeah, I would lean towards, yeah, it could be considered video art, but again, a lot of it's determined by rich white historians, art historians, and that what they put in the book. But I'm putting Aphx Twin in the history books, even though I don't like his music as much as like Autechre or whatever, however you say it. But yeah. Yeah, more for early YouTube content was super hyper and silly in general. Yeah, exactly. Like when YouTube was starting, or even I would say Flash stuff as well, Flash animations. Like people were pushing what is possible to do with this, and ever since beginning, things become more and more refined. So yeah, back when I'm glad you brought that up, Amorpher, but back when like these were new, people were doing things that had never been seen before that might be considered pretentious or stupid now, but like the wonder of having a portable video player and you could do anything with it. People don't know what they're doing, and that's awesome. I love experimentation. Oops. Oh no, I just want to advance. All right. So again, video art has a very deep history, despite it not being that old, and yeah, it's super interesting because it is 4D and there's a lot of theory that goes into it, but whatever, it exists. Okay, so now animation. So I purposely chose all animations of Bales. I can't not talk about Bale anymore or further. I have to talk about Bale every week. It's legal. So animation is different because than video, because it usually encapsulates a whole different range of different types of animation. For traditional animation, which basically means hand drawn, which can be both written down like pen and paper animation, or it could mean digital animation where you draw with a pen and a tablet. There's also stop motion animation, which consists of pictures sequenced in an order to create the illusion of motion. And then computer animation. Apparently this is from The Sims. It's interesting. All right. And then here's Courage the Cowardly Dog. So I'm one of those people who cannot stand things. Like, I'm not one of those, oh, back in the 90s, everything were better. I cannot stand, like, 90s kids things. I'm going to say Courage the Cowardly Dog is my favorite cartoon, not because of nostalgia, because it's really, really amazing. It's genuinely beautiful as far as, like, the concepts and the animation, and it's one of my favorite. No, it is my favorite cartoon for sure. I haven't seen much Adventure Time, but I'd probably rate that high if I saw more of it. But yeah, animation is another. So animation's kind of a tricky thing because within this art world, or whatever, contemporary art world, gallery art world, like cartoons are not. Where's the line between fine art and commercial art? I don't know. Like, some of my favorite artists have GIFs that are on the website Giphy, which is where I got it from, Giphy, as well as like just everyday people, as well as like the Sims screen capture that's turned into an animation. So where's the line between that? Who knows? I don't know. It's very interesting to think about. So I'm gonna play this while I talk about this. So this is my first Kinetic Sculpture. This is a form of time and art because you'll see me struggle with it. And yeah, this was me in like 2012. So Kinetic Sculpture is a really, really cool medium, but it's super difficult to make and it's super difficult to keep working. So my plan, like this is a self-portrait, by the way, a puppy licking a heart. Kinetic Sculpture is really cool because it has a physical embodiment of something that moves. So it does do the 3D to 4D transition pretty well. But yeah, it's a really, really difficult medium to master. And this is a 5-minute video of me like awkwardly struggling to get it to work well. I don't know. I think Kinetic Sculpture is kind of underrated because you could use like wind chimes as Kinetic Sculpture. Um, like there's sculptures by Alexander Calder who has these mobiles, like the kind of mobiles that you have above babies' cribs, if those are even still a thing, etc. But you can see it like at the rate this thing is going, that it's hard. Okay. And these are called Strand by Theo Jensen, which are wind-powered kinetic sculptures. So these are operated entirely by wind, and these things are moving by themselves, which are kind of creepy and scary, and I would definitely not want to fight one to the death. But yeah, these are probably the most famous examples of kinetic sculptures out there. Performance art. So performance art is like a mini genre unto itself of art that typically is metaphorical, typically uses the body. It's part of performance art. The appeal of it is that you kind of have to be there to get the full effect. So this is what's called a documentation to the right, where Marina Abramovich and Yule, they did a lot of performance art together, and obviously this is a photograph from 1980. It's not what's happening in front of you right now. So documentation is freezing things in time, either with video or photos or a drawing of something that sort of proves that this performance existed, which is kind of funny because part of the appeal of performance art is being there in person and witnessing this. I really gotta get a mod. Yeah, I'll address that in Discord chat. Anyways, so it's very interesting that we have these documentations of performance art. So this is a photo, but it documents something that was in action, because a performance can't really exist if it's static, right? So the reason it's in this lecture is because there's time. So this is an interesting one because all you need to know about this, it comes from this one image. But you can sense like why this was a performance, because if you let the arrow go, then there would be the artist is present, right? She would have died. So performance requires some element of time and duration in order to exist. Some of them even more. Some performance art is all about like laying still in a coffin for like 20 hours or something like that. And then there's other ones, like the most famous one is by Chris Burden, I want to say. I can't remember. Where he had a friend shoot him in the arm, which is ridiculous for several reasons, but it was a performance art, and he was testing boundaries, so whatever. But yeah, all of them hinge on time. And then there's another type of performance art called relational aesthetics. If you ever end up in art school, you will probably hate this term, relational aesthetics. I went to art school. I cannot stand it at all. Some boring white French dude like talks about blah, blah, blah. But anyways, relational aesthetics are essentially ways for the artist to engage with a community of some sort. Something like that. It's a nebulous thing. Like this, for example, my Greller friend, Neil Daigle Oriens, he did this thing called conversion therapy where he talked about conversion therapy, but trying to convert that into a more positive space by like talking to people about like coming out and conversion therapy and what that means, and creating a nice space to sort of oppose actual actual conversion therapy. Oh my goodness, Jake. um, so yeah, it's like another famous one. I can't remember the artist, but was they set out like a community dining table for homeless people in a gallery, which is kind of interesting in a way because it used the gallery to like feed people instead of like having paintings to be sold to rich people. But at the same time, like you can just do that without making it art. I don't know. So it's a weird thing. Relational aesthetics. I'd say I don't think about it most of the time. And then video games. So I'm going to have a separate lecture on video games in, I think, maybe 2 weeks or something like that. So they're interactive. Obviously, there's more interactive art out there, but I like video games because they're awesome. And and when we consider that 5D since it's interactive, it's possible. Like when it comes to physics, heck no. But yeah, so this is a screenshot from Algebra Action, which I picked a random game from this website called Moby Games, which is a database for games. And I just picked the first one that looked cool. So here's Algebra Action, a prime example of what video games are like. And then movies, of course, involve time. But again, that's a different department. And so I'm not going to talk about it. However, I will talk about Sharknado 2 real quick. So when I got my new phone number, I kept on getting text messages to this guy, Michael. Obviously, I'm not Michael. And this one time I got a text message like talking about plans for the premiere of Sharknado 2. And oh my gosh, I wish I was Michael at that moment because like that would be amazing to have a Sharknado 2 premiere party. And I was just so jealous of this Michael guy. But yeah, so this is where we are at with cinema today. It evolved from this, which is the first oldest surviving film that we have in existence, which is just a couple of seconds long. And then this is where it evolved to, which is obviously a lot better than this boring scene. Who cares about this when you can have a man chainsawing through a flying shark? But film did come from photography. So Edward Muybridge did this bet with a professor or the president, someone important at Stanford, about when a horse gallops, do all four legs leave the ground? And this was proven to be successful. And so Edward Muybridge did this sequence where he set cameras in a row, and whenever the horse would he would trigger, or the horse would trigger a trip, I guess you would call it, to make the shutter go off. And so he created the first sequence here of a horse galloping. And so this was a predecessor to the film because it showed how to show that you can use still images in cameras to sort of simulate motion by producing images one right after the other. Okay, so however, time is represented in still images. You can do that as well. So photographs the easiest example, and this is kind of a boring example, but it's also if you take most of you probably won't take an art history class. I think most of you are not art history majors. So this is kind of cool, but this is the first known photograph of a human right here. So that's why this photograph is famous. So this back then in the 1800s, photography wasn't instantaneous. This was a couple minutes exposure. The very first photograph by Nicephore Niepce, which is a name you don't have to know, and I probably pronounced very incorrectly, It took, I think, 8 hours to expose a really crappy photo. This one was a few minutes, I believe, and this was actually a very busy city. So you'll know. So if you ever take a photo and things are blurry, especially when they're at night, it's because the shutter is open a long time, and things get blurry and you can't see them clearly. However, this is supposedly a person who is getting his shoes shined, and so he was still enough for the camera to capture him, whereas people walking around him were walking too fast in order to be captured. So this shows a duration of time where, again, you would see carriages or carriages, probably not cars back then. I don't know when cars were created. So you don't see those people walking or those horses walking along because they're just too fast. Again, the shutter had to be open for 2 minutes or several minutes for this to happen. And this is another example of a long exposure. This is Burnside in Portland, Oregon, also in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. So this is a photograph of a skateboarder skating around a park holding like a light or a flare LED light or something like that. So wherever this light is, that's where the skater went to. But the reason you can't see him is probably a him, because skateboarding was mostly male back here. I'll say them, but this skateboarder, whoever they were, the camera was can only capture the brightest parts clearly, because a good way to put it is when you do the flash, the reason you can see things so clearly is because there's a lot of light on it. And if the flash doesn't reach like behind a tree behind you, like 50 feet behind you, it's not going to show up in the photo. So camera is dependent on light. All right, so like because the light is super bright, it captures that, but the skateboarder themselves, they're not illuminated, they're not a light themselves, so they're not going to show up in the image. But the reason all this shows up is because it's standing still. There also might have been people walking by here as well, but again, because the exposure was probably a minute here, they'd have to stand still for a minute in order to be in the image, so they weren't there. And this is the exact opposite of that. Just like I mentioned, when you have a flash, it can capture time very instantaneously. So this is the cover of It Splits by Yeah Yeah Yeahs. If you're in your 20s, you might not know who they are. I think that would be pretty interesting. They were very big when I was in high school. So yeah, this is obviously an image that's taken not over several minutes, but an instant, right? Fun fact, most flashes... Oh, this may be film only. I was going to say most flash photography takes place over 1/60th of a second, but I don't think that's true with digital cameras now. But with film cameras, that was the case. So yeah, this captures time instantaneously. So, and this shows us even better. So, slow shutter means the shutter was open for a longer time, which means more light is let in, and that means things are going to get blurrier if they're not still. But with a fast shutter, even though this thing is spinning, it's open for a shorter amount of time, so you see more detail, just like this. So no matter what in photography, time is always going to be represented because of the fact that there's no such true thing as an instant, because things exist as a slice of time. So this might have been taken at 1/5000th of a second, but that's still a passage of time, even though it's short. And we have these slow-mo cameras where they can capture things up to 100,000th of a second. Even though that's instantaneous to us, time still passes, as small as it is. And so there's no such thing as no time in photography. It's just an extremely tiny amount of time. As far as physics is concerned, I don't know if there's such thing as no time, but as far as photography is concerned, there has to be time. So other instances of time when it comes to different media, this is Georges Braque, who was also he was a co-collaborator in the movement of Cubism, alongside the misogynist jerk named Picasso, which someone you might have heard of. But this is representing multiple viewpoints on one canvas. Obviously, humans can't see multiple viewpoints at once. You can only see your own. And so this is an attempt to represent, it is one instant, but it's, again, multiple viewpoints, which can't be perceived in one instant, if that makes sense. So this is sort of a way to represent time in a fractured way. And then this is a painting called Motion Blur represented on the canvas. Okay, so this is a very typical painting to... I like to pick more contemporary examples, but there's a puppy, so I'm not complaining about it. But this is in 1912, and this represents motion blur, or a strobe effect made into a painting, right? So this obviously takes place over more than an instant, right? So it's more than 1/5000th of a second. It's probably a second or so, or even 1/60th of a second, depending on how fast they're going. And then multiple frames in one image. So this is possible in photography. This is computer, or no, this is photography actually. Obviously, it's claymation with some edits. But yeah, you do have the ability to take multiple exposures in one image like this, and this shows a passage of time. So you can have multiple frames in one image, and this shows a passage of time. And we read this as a passage of time because this is probably one dog jumping instead of 5 dogs in different states. You might read it as that, and that would be fine, but I read it as a sequence of time. All right, so my question for you right now on your own is, does this image show time at all? It's computer generated, right? And it just shows 3 what are these called? Binkies. I don't know the actual names of them. This shows 3 binkies at rest. However, keep in mind what I said about photography. Things can only exist in time in photography. Obviously, this was created in a computer. But however, there is a shadow which could represent the sun, which could represent a sun setting, and that indicates time. Or it could just be... you could see it as a 100% still thing because it was created inside a computer where time wasn't an issue. Yeah, I don't know. Does this image show time at all? It depends on your perspective of what time means to you. Again, it could be that cheesy urbandictionary.com definition. Who knows? But the reason I asked it for this is because these are real objects. They have to exist they had to come into existence at some point. So do you consider the creation of this as part of the time for these binkies to exist? I don't know. And even furthermore, shout out to Jake for pointing out this artist. What about this one? What a completely abstract image. Is there passage of time here at all? So there's shadows here. Is there a light there, or is this just darker? Is it just happen to be darker here? Is there any time represented in abstraction at all? I don't know. It's something to think about. This is a little break. I came across this yesterday, and I figured I want to burn everyone's eyes, not just mine. Okay. All right, so comics. So comics is an amazing medium. It's better than painting. It's better than drawing. I think video games and comics are kind of tied. Video games might be a little bit better, but in the ranking, comics is at least number 1 or number 2, objectively. I'm just kidding, of course. I wish I could just retain my dry humor and not say just kidding, but I want to make sure I'm covered with that. Like, I don't mean that. All right, so time in comics is strange. So most of these examples come from this book called Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud that I have a link to, I think at the end of this lecture or in the slideshow. It's a PDF of it, which is used for educational purposes, like legitimately. So time is really weird in comics because it doesn't make sense if you really think about it. And this is the example that Scott McCloud uses. So this is one panel, all right? So when we think of comics in one panel, we think of one, like an instant probably, right? But let's break this down a little bit from left to right because we're American English readers. So on the left, we have this guy saying smile, while at the same time this flash goes off. So already here there's a problem in representing reality because a flash goes off in, like I said, probably at this era, probably 1/60th of a second. However, saying the word smile takes longer than 1/60th of a second. So those things are not congruent with each other. And let's make this even more complex. So we have at the same instant where this flash is going off, and he's saying smile, which doesn't make sense in itself. These two people are reacting to this, okay? So this person's reacting to this flash going off. However, this speech bubble is apparently the same time as this speech bubble and this flash. Again, the duration of saying, that flash is blinding, Uncle Henry, doesn't match the amount of time this happens or this happens. Well, also, this has to happen after the flash goes off. Otherwise, that wouldn't make sense. And then this person's reacting to this person. So that complicates it even further. Okay, and then this person's reacting to this. And then it keeps on going further down. And this is an example of one person here talking to this person here, and then now here, and then here. So the way comics works with speech bubbles and how time is represented doesn't make any sense in reality. However, comics is special because they have their own language in it. So we just kind of read it as it makes sense. It's something that's learned that we have to make sense of. It's not something that people from other cultures who have never seen comics, they might not understand it at first. So here's 3 different instances of one panel, how time changes. So on the left-hand side, we can see this as an instant, right? Because time is frozen, there's action going on, and we understand this as like this ball's not floating, this guy's dribbling and they're moving, blah, blah, blah. So that we can see that as an instant. However, when we put in the speech bubble, which comes from the announcer probably, based on this staticky bubble, saying he's giving it his all, folks, would take a lot longer than this instant here. So this extends the time of the panel to probably before and after the time of this actual action here. So there's 2 conflicting times within this one panel. But if we turn this speech into a caption, for you film nerds, non-diegetic dialogue, This is happening outside the universe. This is the narrator saying this. The narrator exists outside of the universe that these characters can't hear. That, again, we're reading it, and that takes longer than this action. But the action is still an instant, even though it takes us time to read this. But then if we think back again, well, it takes us time to perceive this. It probably also takes us time to perceive this action here, where we don't see this as just random lines everywhere. We read this as, okay, this guy plays for the New York Sonics, or whatever they're called. And this is probably his opponent because he's dressed in a different color, so we have to have time to perceive this. So yeah, it takes time to read things, takes time to say things, and that's can be in conflict with the action that's going on. However, it could match the amount of time that's going on as well. So what's interesting is that time within comics, it exists. The past, present, and future exist simultaneously. Okay, so what I mean by that again is the announcer could have said this before this happened, or he could have said after it's happened. And I'll give more examples over here. I think I jumped the gun a little bit. Yeah. All right. So what's the definition of comics? I don't know, because it depends on who you're talking to. So here's 3 different examples: Will Eisner, Scott McCloud, and Urban Dictionary. Will Eisner, who's the oldest of these, says sequential art, which means art in a series of sequences. But then Scott McCloud, who is his protege, says this really long definition that's very specific, that's still disputed. And then Urban Dictionary says a novel but with visuals and speech bubble dialogue that makes it more interesting and fun to read. Which honestly I agree with. I think comics are way more fun to read than pictureless novels. I'm a very visual person, so yeah, take that with a grain of salt. That's Urban Dictionary for you. However, comics is a medium. So what I mean by that is comics isn't a genre of writing or a genre of art necessarily. It's a medium unto itself. It does not a style of drawing. It does not just about superheroes, obviously. It's not just the daily funnies that you see in newspapers, and it could take a lot of different kinds of forms. Okay. So the first distinction is comics is not the same as cartooning. So comics, again, is a medium. It's not a style of drawing. So when we think of comics, we think of cartooning. So cartooning, as shown right here, is a form of illustration where forms are kind of simplified to symbolize things. Because if you have a lot of really detailed images, that might take a long time to make a comic. But as this, I didn't put the title here, my bad. But as this woodcut comic proves, woodcuts take a long time to make. Those can be comics too. Same thing with photographs. You can make comics out of photographs, but we don't really see those too often. Probably because it takes a lot of time and effort to stage things and make things look really good. Whereas the reason people use comics most of the time probably is because we're reducing people and bales to simplified forms to get the point across, because it's very, very, very tedious to draw people over and over and over again. So cartooning's probably used in comics the most, because it's the easiest way to represent a person or object over and over again without being super repetitive and time consuming. Also, comics don't have to be comic as in fun. So it doesn't have to be funny necessarily. So this book called Don't Go Where I Can't Follow is about Anders Nielsen, who is a Portland, Oregon native, I think, but he's based in Portland, Oregon. This is about his wife who passed away. Some comics about her, but also includes like photos and stuff like that. So this is definitely considered a comic because Anders Nielsen is a comic artist primarily. So the subject matter doesn't have to be funny or comic in order for it to be a comic. Doonesbury is another good example of this. It ran in the funnies, but it tackled a lot of subject matter, especially around the 911 era. So don't mistake comics for having to be funny all the time. And different ways that comics take form. So again, here's the Sunday strip. Calvin and Hobbes obviously is a big example, and it holds up super well, and it's cliche, but it truly is remarkable. Even after reading tons and tons of comics, it holds up super well. So gag strips or editorial cartoons or political cartoons are a subgenre of comics, which is basically one panel. This is a contentious thing as well because back in this panel, not necessarily this one, Urban Dictionary, but with Scott McCloud and Will Eisner, they say it needs to include a sequence, but this is basically a comic like Family Circus. Within the comic strips, the funnies, like we're usually one panel with some dialogue. It's not a sequence, and some people consider a sequence necessary for something to be a comic. Is it a comic? I don't know. Again, this is totally dependent on your personal idea of what a comic is. I personally don't care. Sure, if you want it to be a comic, sure. Go ahead. I don't care. Comic books is a series of comics, usually engaged in a bigger storyline. I Googled worst comic book covers and ended up with this. Interactive comics is a form of comics, usually digital, sometimes on paper, where you get to choose your own adventure, essentially. So this example from a book from one of my online friends, Hien Pham. You can choose whether to focus on this boy or this boy, and if you choose this boy, you get this page. If you choose this boy, you get this page. You'd have to play it over again to get both dialogues. That's an option. Graphic novels is basically a novel in graphic form. This is also kind of contentious in the... I need to go faster. This is contentious because some people think of graphic novels as trying to get away from comics because comics might seem too childish or whatever. But graphic novels, I would say, is a legit thing because it's a novel in graphic form as opposed to this, which is more serial. Serial. SERIAL, and as opposed to a mini comic. Mini comic's a different thing. Moving on. A tiny comic. I made a bunch of these. I don't have enough time for this. And then web comics, which is probably what we're most familiar with. It is what it says on the tin. Okay, so actually this is near the end of the lecture. So is the following comic? It depends on your personal definition. So this is the Bayou Tapestry from 11th century or so. And this shows a sequence of events happening, but it is created on tapestry, and there are several of these. Would you consider this a comic? It's not necessarily recognizable as a comic nowadays because there's no real panels, but it is read like a comic. I don't know. What do you think? Also, this is an excerpt from Stations of the Cross, which is essentially the story of Jesus being murdered, which is very gruesome the more you think about it. These are done in stained glass, and they are pretty distinct panels, but they sit on a wall, or in a wall, rather, I guess. And would you consider those a comic? Again, it depends on your personal definition. Some people prefer to say, like, a comic has to be handheld, and a singular experience in order to be a comic. I don't know. Since I have a few more minutes, I'm going to talk about the gutter. So the gutter is an example of this between the panels. Like, this is an indefinite amount of time where it sort of tells us time is passing between these panels, where this panel and this panel are connected. This happens after the other. And so we assume in this panel that Calvin and Hobbes move from here down to looking at here instead of moving simultaneously. Like, these don't simultaneously exist. Like, this happens in a sequence. So the gutter is what happens between what we imagining them going from here and then imagining them going to sit down to look at this comic strip, right? So that's the gutter. And yeah, and again, what's kind of cool about comics is, let's say we're reading the second panel. While we're reading this exists and this exists simultaneously. Whereas when we have a film, we only see one frame at a time, because they're stacked on top of one another. But with comics, that's what these are called. We can see them all at once, which is interesting. So before I go, I want to show you this. Let's look at me, because I'm so beautiful. Obviously. So this is a stack of comics I've done daily. I've been doing it since December 20th. Oh, I haven't shared it, but I made a safe for work compilation of these comics, because there's some subject matter that's not appropriate to show my students, like dealing with romance and feelings and stuff. I would feel uncomfortable, and some cuss words, I guess, because y'all don't know what cuss words are. But yeah, comics are a very interesting way to. I've been using these as journals, and they're really, really. Comics are a good way to sort of get those feelings out and to learn how to draw. And it's on Discord for students in my class. But yeah, comics is your assignment to do it, and you can use photos. And if you do use photos, you'll get plus 5 points. So yeah, I could have talked for comics a lot more, but since I only do 1 week per subject, I condensed it quite a bit. So let's see if I can get Dr. Baby out. Nope. She's hanging. Actually. Oh no, she's going to be invisible. I don't know if you can see her. Yeah, she's just black because I have the green keyed out, so all green just disappears. Like, this water bottle is green. And yeah, she's a green mantis, so you can't see her. But she's grown a lot. But yeah, I don't want to disturb her and take her out. Alright, so yeah, thanks for sticking around. I hope if you haven't really looked at comics, I hope you start looking at them more critically once I learn they're not just about superhero. I don't like superheroes for many reasons. I do like... Never mind, let's not go there. I think comics are underrated because... I have an example here. I have the Best American Comics. Like, they could be anything. And if you're someone who struggles to read a lot, like me, comics are a really amazing way to read stories, and I highly recommend them. And they could be awesome. The drawings could be awesome, and Honestly, I feel it's yeah, I think it's probably the most innovative medium. The way things are being told is like there's so many different wild things out there. Highly recommend comics. All right. So yeah, that's it. Thank you so much. Love you. Toodles. Bye bye.